Hello, I'm Matt Bergman, and you are listening to the Punk Rock Libertarians podcast, episode 268. I'm here tonight with Jared Schneiderman,
What up, guys?
Alex Miller,
Hey, how's it going?
and then we've got two first timers on tonight. We've got Craig Shute,
Hey
and then
guys.
Craig, and then we've got Mike Shipley.
Hey everybody.
Yeah, wow, this is fun, man, because it's like I don't know, I'm just like excited about the podcast tonight. I think we're gonna have good times.
Hell yeah, bro.
Hell yeah. So, Mike Shipley. So you're actually right now you're in the process of running for to be chairman of the Libertarian National Committee, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So, like, how's that going? Do you think like Austin's going to happen?
Um, I don't I don't know if us is gonna happen. The thing with the bylaws is more or less that like I've heard about this idea where like according to where the bylaws are in relation to Robert's rules is that like technically we have to call a physical convention to order in Austin. Um and the awkward thing is like what they could do is they could pass a bylaw that like suddenly allows an electronic meeting. But the big problem with that is anybody who with even like an ounce of foresight is going to recognize that anyone can show up and be a majority and do kind of like a runaway convention thing, um, which would be nice to believe that we're all, you know, acting in good faith or whatever. But
Hmm.
the reality is we're humans and this is politics and that doesn't always happen. So the sort of the wise thing to do is show up anyway just in case so that like nobody has that majority. So I don't know what people are going to decide to do in terms of like balancing um personal responsibility with sort of tactical um wisdom. But if the LNC is I would like to think that they could find a way to make it a digital convention. I was looking through the bylaws and it just says there are some other ones about electronic voting that would be a lot harder to kind of read into. But as far as like convention, it just says it has to happen in a time and place decided by the LNC. So like Zoom is a place. So I'm not saying they should like try to bend every word in the bylaws because that's a bad idea too. Because then someone just challenges it, and then we're like back to square one.
Right.
Plus, with a scandal on our hands. So the answer is I don't know because they have kind of all the control over that right now. But one of those many things will probably happen.
Hmm. And when will
So,
we find out what is going to happen?
Um, I'd have to check my. Not even sure if I put that on my calendar.
I think
Um,
it's pretty late though, right? I mean, we're already like what 3 or 4 weeks out.
We are, and they scheduled another one of their digital meetings, and that's what I'm kind of scrolling. It looks like I think I was on mobile when it happened, so I didn't. I need to put it on my calendar. But there's
Hmm.
another one of their like digital Zoom, like they did one about 10 days ago or so, and I don't know that they're going to make the decision that day, but it would be nice to get a decision soon.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, so like what would you say for like, people that are going to Austin or people that are delegates? Like why should they pick you for LNC chair?
So here's the thing. Um, I do really well when people get to meet me in person. And now that convention season has been cut short, um, I don't know that I can sum that up in 30 seconds or a minute. The landscape is different for me now.
Were you
Um,
gonna do like handies at the convention, or like what is?
no, like I'm a really lovable person, but you don't get to like find that out until you meet me like in real life. Um, but it's not my lovability that should make me chair. It's that I'm actually committed to the principles of like a bottom up world. Um, you know, the power should be held by the individual. It shouldn't be held by a group of elite people who make decisions for us. And what I'm seeing with the LNC, like over a long term period, like there's been like a slow grade scope creep. And now that we've had like a really super popular chair who has served like 3 terms in a row with like this huge mandate,
Hmm.
there's kind of like a sense of almost entitlement growing in that spot, to where the figure of the chair is taking on this like mythos that is, in my opinion, kind of dangerous, because it's leading to this condition where we believe that the chair should have all the answers and nobody could ever measure up to Nick, right? And when that single position takes on that sort of like aura where no one can fill it, we start to like gravitate towards these powerful figures, like to fill that spot, you know. And
Would you say that you're the man to fill this gaping void? What, dude? It's a question.
I'm gonna, yeah, no,
Right.
actually, no. What I can fill is the gaping void left by like a person of principle, um, in that spot. I think
So
that
you don't think Nicholas Sharkweek has the principle?
what I think is that power corrupts, and
Hmm.
such as it is, even in a third party with very little power, and that is theoretically bottom up. 3 terms is a long time for any human being to be in, a position of privilege like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the Nick that exists today is not the Nick that I voted for in the past, and it's different now. And I think, in order to avoid replicating that, I don't think the outgoing chair should like handpick the incoming chair. Like that's kind of a startling development.
Yeah.
Are you associated with a particular caucus?
No, not in terms of this race. In fact, I've been kind of, it's hard for me because a lot of my responsibilities and the way that I built my reputation has been through caucus organizing. So like I'm simultaneously like pointing to that experience, but also saying, the chair of this party has to represent every person. Like I'm really committed to those values, and my bottom up, or the bottom unity narrative has really, I don't know, it has changed me too. It changes the way I think about factional loyalties and all of those things, right? Like they just feel less important because it's so much more important to have this anti-authoritarian alliance. Like ultimately, the state is our enemy and each other is not. So I'm going to answer no, but we live in the real world. You know, I have roots in some of the caucuses for sure. But I'm not there to kind of advance any specific caucus loyalty or interest.
Yeah, I have to say, Mike, that's one thing that like about you. I'm a big fan of the bottom unity, and find myself getting equally frustrated by both sides, whether it's left or right, that disagree with that. Because like if you put these principles first, the libertarian part, or in my case, the anarchist part, should come first before the ANCAP or left lib. So I don't know. I'm glad there are other voices that are saying that.
That actually
Yay.
leads to we had a list.
Well,
of
I mean, I
questions.
wasn't done because you mentioned
Go
bottom
ahead.
unity. You mentioned bottom unity. Like, how would you explain like bottom unity for somebody who's like, what's bottom unity? Like, explain this hashtag.
Well, the latest way that I've been describing it is as a single issue alliance on anti-authoritarianism. So that's, of course, a very political way of, anti-authoritarianism you have to apply to every issue. So like it ultimately ends up being a new reframe around, the old idea of being a principled libertarian, right? Like, but there are so many different flavors of anti-authoritarianism. So I think that's enough to like put us all on the same page and also orient us. I'm using like plural pronouns. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to collectivize you. If you're not on board with that, it's cool. But those of us who identify as bottom unity anti-authoritarians, like orienting us against the actual top, if that makes sense.
So, if you would define it as the broad single issue of anti-authoritarianism, I mean, is that? I think a lot of people, when they talk about authoritarianism, they talk about like a dictator or there being a lot of power vested with one person. So, would you be? I mean, is it basically just being satisfied with more of a democratic choice of how things are going to be run? Is that a big part of it?
You could say that if that was the language that came naturally to you, if that's the vocabulary of your anti-authoritarianism, um, I think in terms of the party in particular, we define what counts as unjust authority in terms of the non-aggression principle. So the easy answer would be to kind of go to that. Some of the anti-authoritarian ideologies are much pickier about the kinds of authority we submit to, let's say, right? So some of us take that critique and we apply it to the workplace, or we apply it to, the volunteer organizations that we work with. We apply it to our social constructs like gender. Um, and so I would think all of that would count, and everyone has a different, I guess, tolerance for what they're willing to consent to and under what circumstances. But for the purposes of the LP in particular, I think I would look to the non-aggression principle for that.
So yeah, related to that, we did have a question from a listener. Derek asks, "How do you reconcile bottom unity with your rejection of private property rights, and how can that sort of divide between the different philosophies be bridged?" I'm adding the second part.
I'm glad you asked, because I think there's a misconception that rejecting private property is about rejecting the concept of property. So for left libertarians, private property is a legal term. So we're talking about the ways that the state decides what counts as property, and then makes arbitrary choices about whose property gets protected and why, right? So when a left libertarian is rejecting private property, what we're really standing up for is the importance of justly acquired property outside of the state sanctioned controls over what counts as that.
Okay.
So I don't think there's a disconnect. I think like it deeply matters that the fruits of one's labor remain with the one who does the labor, right? Like that's a really super important principle. That's the entire frame around the worker, let's say, right? It's that when I take a raw material and I turn it into a finished good, then that property represents an aspect of my being, right? It's a product of my time, my talent, my energy, and it now belongs to me. And
so you're talking about like the Marxist labor theory of value, right?
No.
No?
No.
How is this different?
Well, what I just described is the labor theory of property, and it really comes out of classical liberalism.
Okay.
To be honest, I don't really understand the labor theory of value. It's very 19th century to me, which I know makes me not the best mutualist ever, but like I live in the 21st century where subjective theory now exists.
So you do buy into the subjective theory of value?
Or you not to the point that I like theory monger people about what they should think, because
well, I'm not. I'm just saying. Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm saying like, do you buy? Like, do you agree with that? Do you think that theory is valid? Do you think that theory?
Jared, you need to just stop theory mongering, bro.
Well, no, but
do you think that theory properly explains value, or at least does a pretty good approximation of how value is derived?
For me, it's the frame that resonates with me, because if trade is mutually beneficial, then that implies to me that it's a bilateral negotiation. To me, that necessarily implies that there are two sides coming to an agreed upon price. And so that's pretty much the core of subjective theory. So,
So what if it's a price for labor? Like, what if a person who owns some resources, uses some money to buy like a whiz bang machine that increases worker productivity, and they contract with a bunch of workers to pay them a certain amount per hour. But I think what you're saying, maybe I misunderstood you. What you're saying is when they produce in those conditions, that the production that comes off the line really belongs to them. So how do you reconcile those two ideas of the owner's right and the worker's right?
Well, for me, I don't necessarily try to quote reconcile them because they can't really like both exist in the same structure, right? So if I'm going to sell my time by the hour, um, then I'm going to be in a workplace where like that's the norm that we're going by. So at that point, I'm negotiating a value for my hourly time, and that's
Mhm.
going to be like a subjective negotiation. But if I'm going to participate in a cooperative, then I'm going to already know going into that it's a different paradigm. And yeah, that's the paradigm that makes sense to me. In fact,
So you're saying you have a preference for a worker-owned co-op or something of that nature, as opposed to the typical sort of hierarchical structures that we have in most companies currently.
it resonates with me more on a principled level. Yes.
Okay. I
I
mean,
think a
as
general
long,
skepticism toward wage labor does make sense from a principled libertarian standpoint. Because if you look at the history of how it came about, the rise of industrialization and it started in England, at first you had all these agrarian workers who, they weren't used to punching clocks, and a lot of these factory owners, they actually had trouble getting people to fill the factories, and a big part of what got them their workforce was this continuing enclosure movement, kicking people off the land, driving them into the cities, and now with a very
how was that done? Was
disproportionate
that
balance of power, like setting terms of employment, and that factor heavily into what we now know as wage labor.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that I think wage labor has zero place, but I understand the socialist critique of that it might not be the dominant one. And ultimately, I don't know, but they might be right. And I don't find it threatening to like question it as the norm or the dominant paradigm.
But if you talk about living in the 21st century, I mean, was the enclosure movement what in like the 1600s?
Yeah, there were rounds of it, but yeah, I mean, it started from even earlier. Henry VIII's
what
time
is the enclosure
before.
movement?
Hmm?
What is the enclosure movement?
It was when uh, basically the king or parliament in charge confiscated, I think it was up to, I want to say, a third of all the land in England, and said, this is ours. If you're here, you now must rent. And if you can't rent, get the fuck off. Go to the city, work in the factory. Maybe they'll have jobs for you
Did this
there.
same thing happen in the United States?
Um,
Because I was under the understanding that most people sort of
This was
voluntarily,
before.
in a
This was
sense, moved
before the
from the
United States.
what's that?
This was before the United States.
Well, I mean, I understand the 1600s before the United States, but I'm saying did it
Do you,
happen?
Jared?
I'm saying did it happen again during the Industrial Revolution, or at least the modern Industrial Revolution, where
yeah, I
people
mean,
voluntarily kind of went from their, or from what I
yeah, I
understand,
mean, you
people
could look at,
voluntarily, or they were forced by their
sure.
predicament
Yeah,
to
I mean,
go
you could
to
look
the
at
cities.
something like Shays Rebellion, as an example. So after the American Revolution, the people who signed up to, fight for the republic against the monarchy, they part of that contract is they would get paid, which whatever. At the end, in the Articles of Confederation, the government said, "Oh, we don't have the power to tax, so we can't actually give you money. But since you've been fighting, your farm wasn't productive, you couldn't pay whatever bills you had, and now you're getting kicked off." And then rather than say, "Hey," to the workers, the people who fought and owned the farms, rather than, "Hey," lean on your side to say, "Hey, here's the back pay that you were owed." The judicial system and executive branch sided with the creditors who said, "Hey, these people who weren't earning money on their farms and were fighting for the republic, whatever, they owe us money for whatever reason because some of them didn't own the land outright." And so the state was siding with landlords rather than the tenants, workers, or small property owners. So
Mm.
one small example. You could probably pick at it a little bit, but I would say if you want more examples of that, just Howard's Inn is a great resource for all the ways that the state colludes with with big business to mess with people.
Is that in like the history of what is it? The history of the people or whatever?
Also, history of the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So I think
yeah.
the takeaway is that like feudalism morphed into the modern, I'll just call it the modern command economy to bypass giving it a name, but it never really went through any kind of an idealized, like completely free market state. So trying to kind of
acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean that's the bottom line, is that there was never a time when the invisible hand created what we have now. It was an unbroken chain of events passing through the hands of different authoritarian figures.
Yeah.
Sure.
So Mike Shipley, earlier today you called me vile and reprehensible.
Oh,
Here we go.
I wish there were stronger words, because those are an understatement.
Like how so, dude?
What? You guys are fun to like be kind of like mean. We have like this cool frenemy thing, and I just like it.
Okay, so you're saying I've been mean?
Oh, vile and reprehensible.
You've been meaner than I've been, dude.
What? Why is that a bad thing? Maybe that's a good thing.
I mean, I mean, honestly, dude, I have fun. I think I might have even been the person that asked you to come back into the group.
Maybe, but I do what I want. So
I'm just saying, I'm just saying I asked you to. I didn't say I told you to.
Well, whoever did or didn't, you clicked yes on my invitation. So.
Well, no, I think if I would have asked you to come back in, of course I would have clicked that. Yes. But yeah, because I mean, I don't know. I always think it's like, I've always had like an entertaining time arguing with you.
Well, I did this with Fakertarians too. Like I like flounced because like I got mad, and then there's no easy way back in without like just popping back in and being, haha, just kidding. So I don't know. I think it's kind of, there are a few groups where there's like a really fun, irreverent sort of grassroots culture that isn't really tied to a specific campaign or outcome. And, you know, PRL is one of those, Fakertarians is one of those. And so I don't know, I feel a little more free to just flounce if I want to flounce, and come back in and say silly things if I want to say silly things. I mean,
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Oh man, I think that's the fun thing about our group too. It can also sometimes be the nauseating thing, but I mean but it's a fun thing as well, you know. So it's like I think it's good times for me personally.
Yeah, it is, and I think that we need this because, I mean, the empire is really brutal and frightening. I mean, I don't know. Actually, the fear is not like big in my mind, but you know what I mean? Like it's there, it's brutal, and it like is making human lives end early every single day. And so this idea that we're going to constantly be throwing ourselves against the monolith, like it does get draining. So I really enjoy having groups where we don't have to feel like that.
Yeah, it's nice. Like every once in a while, my wife and I will go to the convention. Like when we lived in Maryland, we would go to the main ones in DC. It's nice to just be in a room, a big room, where you just can take it as a given that everyone does not think you should be thrown in jail for doing heroin. Like, it's just a nice feeling, you know?
It is. Yeah.
I feel like that's most groups I associate with these days.
That's true.
If there's someone in there
that's because you're in opium dens half the time.
Well, you know, you gotta do what makes you happy.
That's right.
What other topics we got, Matt?
So I think I'm going to jump around a little bit because
All right.
I'm just like curious. Like,
Get crazy,
okay.
dude.
Okay, so Mike Shipley. Okay, so let's say you had to choose between like Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Okay, settle down, Jared. You have to choose between Donald Trump and Joe Biden because somebody's got a fucking gun to your head, and they're like, you got to pick one or the other. Which one is it? Who would you choose?
Oh man.
That's mean.
No. I mean,
Dude, we had similar questions.
it's a
for
question.
back when
Right.
Hillary Clinton was running.
That is a tough one, just because, like, if you balance it out, like, Trump was really alarming at first. And I remember thinking, God, I guess actually I would have like, I remember at the time being Clinton's exactly the same. She's just as bad. She's a warmonger. It doesn't matter. And then Trump happened. And I was like, wait, holy shit. Actually, like the neoliberal, like norm was like more comforting. I suppose it was the devil we know. Right. But now we're 4 years later and like Trump is the devil we know. He is, I mean, but don't get me wrong. He's so
He's
like
the orange devil we know.
he's so unpredictable that I don't know whether to say that like I'm comfortable enough wanting to go back to the neoliberal devil. Like actually that's a really tough choice because I think there will be a sense that like, oh, we're saved from the bad orange man and now it'll defuse any kind of a sort of
Criticism of the
grassroots
government.
movement that's arriving on the left.
Right.
So I can't answer that question easily because the other thing is we don't know what's behind the Biden mask. Like he doesn't appear capable of actually running a nation, let alone.
I think he's lost it.
Yeah, but okay. Like one thing about Biden though, didn't he talk about bringing Beto in as his gun czar?
Yeah, I think he did.
That man's guns have already been confiscated.
See, that's kind of like, and we don't. I think we'll be able to see a little bit more into what might be going on when he picks his vice president, like who was given that promise and starting to hear maybe cabinet names floated around. But, if you look at like what happened when George Bush was so alarming to everyone and then, Obama's going to save us. But then all he did was actually escalate the deportations and the drone bombings and everyone's lives just got worse. Like, I think it's a big mistake to think that just because neoliberalism was the old status quo, that like it's safer somehow than what's really already going on. So
it's difficult because it's like it's safer for some people,
right?
Like, point two, and yeah, that's what's tough. Like, gosh, my son goes to a Montessori school, and his friends' parents are immigrants. We actually they had a conversation with us where they had to ask us like, hey, because they're on DACA or something, and it's like, hey, we don't think this will happen, but we have to plan for it. If someone shows up at our house and we end up getting deported, will you bring our son to us, etc. And it's like really alarming shit. You never would think to hear someone say something like that to you, but yeah, it's tough. I don't like the question either. I'm tempted to say Biden, but I don't feel good about it.
Speaking of those that cabinet you mentioned where they're floating the names, remember that time when WikiLeaks leaked the thing where Citigroup told Obama who to pick for his cabinet and he picked all of them pretty much?
I do vaguely remember that.
Remember that? So neoliberalism isn't necessarily even that benign.
It's definitely not benign.
Well, no, and there's I mean, the thing is that there's been like they're, I guess, much better at executing like long-term plans. So there's been this decades-long unfolding of this sort of global jurisdiction and these trade agreements that are leading up to it. And they're just so good at like masking themselves in rhetoric that's palatable to centrists. And I think there's something insidiously quite frightening about that. So I don't know. I think I'm kind of on board with the like 51% Biden, 49% Trump.
Do you guys think they'll keep Biden, or do you think they'll replace him with somebody? Because he really seems to be losing it.
I mean, like, how could they do that? Like, anytime I've heard an explanation of that, I feel like, oh yeah, it's not going to happen.
Oh my God,
now they're saying like
I feel like the whole maybe what if they replace Biden? It's kind of like last time when people were saying, well, Bernie Sanders could win if like
no, all they got to do is they got to have him come out and say for health reasons, I'm not able to go forward. That's all they have to do.
Pretend that he got COVID, and then they keep floating Governor Cuomo.
What if they
I'm like, what did this guy do?
Yeah, I keep hearing that.
Like, okay, he's in New York. It's like it's just 9/11 or 9/11
Yeah,
shit,
Giuliani over again.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, okay, this guy is happens to be mayor during a fucking tragic period where thousands of people are dying. But does that make him fit for anything? No,
What?
I don't
Only
think
a
so.
third of the number of people of a bad flu season so far. I just want to point that out.
Well, I've actually had more deaths in this period than on 9/11.
Oh yeah, I just mean like as far as diseases go.
Well, what else is causing these deaths?
No,
I mean,
I'm
there's been like 8,000 something deaths,
well, a
as
lot.
compared to like 3 or 4,000 the month of 9/11.
Well, Jared, didn't you see that meme that we shared where the guy's head was like rolled over with like a fucking his
Well, I
head was
get
like
that. I'm
rolled
just saying,
over,
how
right?
do you account for like the extra like 3x deaths that are happening? Just coincidence?
No, I'm not. What do you mean? I didn't say that it was a coincidence. I'm just saying that it's not so far anyway anywhere near as deadly as a bad flu season, and we've shut the whole fucking thing down as though it's
Well,
like Black
But
Plague.
I
I'm
mean,
saying it's deadlier than the flu season. At
well,
least
and then
Oh,
in the period of time. I mean, long term, you might be right. We don't know.
well, yeah, and also, and what if they calmed it down some by turning things off?
well, of course, there's
Well,
no.
that's
That's the problem. Is there's no way that the counterfactual could be proved. It's
right.
that's the way it's going to be spun, no question. They're going to say either if, like in New York City, if there's a bunch of deaths, they're going to say, well, it would have been worse without the lockdown. If
Yeah.
there aren't very many, like where I live, they're going to say, well, you see, the lockdown worked. So there's no way that facts will show in any way that this
Yeah,
doesn't work.
and they some of the people were saying that beforehand, like the guy I've talked about before that was on Rogan. I think his name's Mike Olsterherm, and he's part of the SIDRAP, which is like, I don't know if they're governmental or not. I don't think they are. I think they're just a private organization. I mean, they're probably government funded like everybody else, but he was saying, yeah, I mean, if we do this shit and it works, and people will say like, oh, we didn't have to do this shit. I'm not saying I'm not arguing for it. I'm just
Yeah,
throwing
no,
it out
I'm
there.
just
But
saying that there's no way that you can definitively show that let's
yeah,
say that they don't like the lockdown, and I could say, well, see, we didn't need it. And they'd be like, well, of course we did. And there's no way to
yeah,
prove that.
yeah,
Like,
that's true.
yeah.
That's true. So Bergman, what's up next, dude? You get too high again? I don't
Ah,
have the board,
man.
dude. I don't have the
Dude,
board. I'm at
you,
I'm at
you'll be
home.
okay. You'll be okay, bro.
Got to fill that dead air, bro.
Yeah, dude. Okay, so Mike Shep. so,
Or create more of it, whatever you want to do.
all right, guys. Okay, so, all right. Okay, so I guess next we'll talk about Bernie suspends campaign.
Right. So we kind of briefly talked about this last week, but it looks like he is going to stay on. So he suspends the campaign, but he's kind of staying in it, and will continue to collect delegates if any like Bernie Bros want to keep wasting their vote.
And harassing apparently people online in racist screeds, from
Right.
what President Warren said.
Right. Yeah. So, I don't know. I don't know what this. And he claims that he wants to have more of an influence at the convention. But what is that really going to mean? What sorts of Bernie policy agendas do we have to worry about? What's going to make it through? What do you guys think?
I mean, isn't that like what his goal was? 2016, and where at the end he ended up trying to get his supporters to vote for Hillary because he said, "Hey, 80% of what we wanted is in this now platform," and he like held up the papers or whatever, and that's our accomplishment of this campaign. And so vote for Hillary. We're getting 80% of what we wanted. So,
Well,
I
isn't
could see
that?
doing-
Yeah, and I guess we never found out, right? We never found out if
Right.
this would have gotten implemented. So, I guess he can come back and say, "Well, we're trying again. We're trying
Yeah.
again. This time it'll work."
Yeah.
Well, I think that with all the I don't know if you just want to call them socialists. Let's go with that. With the Bernie end of the Democratic Party, I mean, when they pushed through Obamacare, not them, but the neoliberals did. When they got Obamacare, everybody said or on our side, we're saying, geez, this is just a smokescreen. They're going to use this to get Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not, what's it been? 8 years. And it seems pretty clear that the system has been stressed and broken enough that I don't see how they aren't going to get that within the next few years. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when like I definitely said with Obamacare, it kind of seemed like they were like it kind of seemed like they were trying to like fuck up the private system so much to where people would be begging for Medicare for all,
Right.
and they were definitely trying for that. Trump has done some cool things though, hasn't he? Like he like got rid of
Well,
the
he got rid of the individual mandate.
yeah, he got rid of the mandate, which is
But
a big deal.
Well, sort of, except that if you do that and you don't do if you don't roll back any of the other stuff that they did, there's a reason that they did that. And it's because if you can sign up for insurance when you're sick, then you also have to have a mandate that you can't just sign up when you're sick. Otherwise, you get an insurance death spiral. Like, that's obvious. Um, so the question is, I mean, I live in New York, right? And before Obamacare came through, we lived under Obamacare basically because New York had wrecked its insurance market with community rating and guaranteed issue, which are two of the biggest things of Obamacare. That was just extended to the whole country. So there's nowhere you can like flee to now. But I mean, basically, they just handed out a bunch of subsidies for people so they wouldn't have to pay quite as much for, they wouldn't shoulder it right out of pocket themselves. I don't see how this doesn't lead to just more and more socialism, because if it's any intervention, right, any market intervention leads to bad effects, and then they intervene to fix those effects, which lead to more bad effects, and that's how you end up with this more creeping statism. And you can see it in healthcare very, very easily.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like we've kind of been moving towards that way of like the single payer healthcare. Mike Shipley, question: what do you think about healthcare? Like, what do you think should be done to fix things?
So ultimately, I think the state should be completely divested of any influence or control over healthcare, because human lives are obviously something they can't be trusted with. I think it tells you a lot about the sort of, I don't even know what to call it, the medical industrial complex, or I don't know if you want to call it the insurance cartel or whatever it is.
Yeah, I've heard some people call it like the pharmaceutical industrial complex.
I mean, it is so giant and monstrous that libertarians are now making a plausible argument that Medicare for all is an incremental step towards liberty. And I just find that so sort of delightfully ironic, that a monopoly over healthcare by, the most, I got called for calling it the most brutal institution ever. So one of the most brutal empires that has ever walked the planet. And that's considered not, I don't buy this. Like, I don't think ascribing a positive role to the government in healthcare is like not a helpful logic. So I don't think that painting M4A, Medicare for All, as a healthy step towards liberty is helpful, but it's really super plausible. Like, it actually would scale down a lot of the other like costs and everything that are going around. And that's why you have someone like Bernie who's able to paint it as like a fiscally responsible thing to do, and it's going to save all this money. So I just it's kind of disturbing all around.
But I mean, that's only even like under their own projections, right? When they say like, oh, it'll save all this money, like they have from 1965 what they projected Medicare would spend in 1990, and I don't know, it was like $3 billion, and they spent like $90 billion. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but it was something that off, like that ridiculous. So whenever they talk about these projections of like saving money or how much something's going to cost, I just have to laugh in their face. Like, what are you even talking about? Why isn't anybody listening?
Well, so I guess instead of talking about something I hate and I don't really want, and whether it really counts as pragmatic, if you think about like what would be a true libertarian, quote, socialist or whatever you want to call it, a completely voluntary healthcare. Even the word system doesn't, you don't, it's not a system. Like, we're not going to implement it on you. We're going to get the state out of the way and like let it rise up from that. But like doctors are the people that know, and nurses, healthcare providers, they're the people that know. So like a hospital would be run like a cooperative. Those workers would be making decisions about which care is the most wise. And there were actually mutual aid societies in the 19th century, or even like back before unions got subverted by the state, when they were, authentic free market entities, or at least quasi so back in the day. They were able to meet those needs. And we hear all these horror stories about how they were letting grandmas die in the streets, and like grandmas are dying now. And if so, but the point is that is actually like proven to work. And the welfare state came along and they started making it illegal. And now your charity has to be a 501c, and there's an entire, nonprofit complex around that. And then, we don't need our mutual aid institutions anymore because, the welfare state's going to take care of everybody. And the progressive era really like did a disservice to the anarchist movements that were flourishing at the end of the 19th century, because a lot of this infrastructure was in place at the time. So I do encourage listeners to kind of go back and look into some of that history, because
there's an essay by Roderick Long, How Government Solved the Healthcare Crisis, Medical Insurance That Worked Until the Government Fixed It. And I remember reading that a while ago, and it's good. I'll post it in the comments.
I read a really good book by I think it was Bob Murphy, and the doctor, it was an MD, was Doug. I think his name was Doug McGuff, and it talked about basically all the interventions in the insurance and the healthcare markets, which they're not the same. Health insurance and healthcare are not the same. Interventions in both of those markets in the last, I don't know, say 120 years. Well, they talked about when things first got going, when they really started, because before a certain point, they really didn't have much in the way of medicine. They didn't really know kind of what they tried. But when they started getting like the germ theory, and they really kind of had doctors that kind of knew what they were doing, I think it was in the early 1900s, all these, like you were talking about, Mike, the different lodges and like the Elks and the, whoever, they would have a lodge doctor, and the members could go and they could, say in current dollars, pay them like $20, and then they would provide all this medical care to the members. And and I don't think it was that particular thing, but the AMA was founded as a union of doctors to try to keep out
the AMA, the Ask Me Anything.
Yeah, it was founded in 1900 to keep out doctors.
Oh yeah, that's right.
The American Medical Association. Sorry, keep going. Keep going. Sorry.
No, that was it. And like that, they were founded to they forced the closure of a huge number of medical schools. They capped the size of the med student classes, and they instituted a lot of licensure for doctors, which really, really cut back the supply of doctors. And here we are. If you want to open a hospital now, you have to have a certificate of need. And you know what that is? It means you have to go before a board.
Yeah, which the board is composed of like people from other hospitals.
Yes.
And why on earth would they want to like bring in another hospital to compete with?
Right.
Exactly. So when anybody says like, oh, there's not enough hospital beds, look at this government crisis, all I can say is, right.
The free market's failed us. No,
failing because there's
not
enough
a free market. Yeah. Totally, man. Like Jeff Bezos should be able to bring in like the fucking Amazon hospital, dude.
Yeah. Prime healthcare.
Yeah, dude.
Prime.
Right, what is it? Those new stores he has, like the Amazon Go. You just come in, take what you want. And
Oh yeah, dude.
Yeah, it would be like an Amazon drug.
Like,
You just
yeah,
go
like
in.
the hospital go.
Yeah,
Just come in, take some opiates.
right.
Out.
Oh, dude, it's like
I
the
mean, I'm
last time
okay with it. Whatever.
Of course, you are, you heroin addict.
Yeah, you guys didn't see me tie it off earlier. Oh man. All right, what else we got on there, Matt?
I don't know, man. I think we're pretty much through the board, so we can just talk about like whatever the fuck we want to talk about, dude.
All right, did we get any? Let me pull up the Facebook, see if we got any comments there, any questions there. Probably should have had that up before, but you know.
Yeah, you probably should have, Jared. That's a good idea.
We like to be prepared on this podcast.
Clearly.
I thought Matt.
What are you saying, Shipley?
I thought we were going to talk about how I wasn't allowed.
By the way, Shipley, I love your T-shirt, dude.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's like so hot, dude. Hell yeah.
What were you about to say,
Hold on.
Craig?
Well, first I want to see what his shirt says.
It says it's just a
Ooh.
podcast.
Oh, nice. No, I was just gonna say I thought we were gonna talk about how I wasn't allowed to go to church this morning.
Oh yeah, you skipped. over
Oh
that,
shit,
dude.
yeah,
What's wrong with you?
We skipped over that. Okay, so like,
First of all, I want to wish everybody a happy Easter, and I want to wish a happy Passover to Jared and the International Banking Cartel.
oh, shit.
I will extend your well wishes to them at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Shalom. Okay. No. All right. So you wanted to talk about Easter. So okay, I've noticed a lot of posts today where people are like, you know, kind of like ragging on.
They were ragging on. They're ragging on the government for like preventing people from going to church.
Exactly. Yeah, I've noticed a lot of that. You know, which like I agree with. You know, like that's like you shouldn't prevent somebody from going to church because you know that's like your constitutional right. And you know, aside from the Constitution,
It's your human right.
what was that? Yeah, it's like your human right. It's your natural right. You know, but at the same time, I feel like those same people aren't saying enough of like it would be fucking retarded to go to church today because there's like a lot of old people at church and like a lot of kids running around spreading the virus, you know. So it's like I feel like there's just not a good conversation going on.
I think the only way I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm obviously not that successful at this, so what the hell do I know? But I think the only way you're going to get to any kind of freer society is if you build up society outside of the state, right? So like if you're always your default is like everyone's stupid and nobody can handle anything, I feel like there's no result from that other than we need more government. So like I mean the week before, this is actually a good example. The week before the New York State shut everything down, I went to mass early, and I go every week, and I went, and it was less than half as full as it normally is. So and this is not specific to church. I don't know why it couldn't be with everything. Why can't people who are either immunocompromised or scared about this stay home and stay away from people? And then people who are either less immunocompromised or less scared of it go to places and socially distance at that same time when they're there. Nobody was like, they didn't distribute the cup, so nobody was like drinking out of the same cup. They didn't pass the peace. Like people take steps, regardless of government coercion, to keep people.
Yeah.
Greg, the answer to that is because you can have, in this case, COVID-19 for 10 days, 2 weeks before you show symptoms. So you could have it not even know.
No, I understand that, but that doesn't change the fact that people who have decided that whatever they're going to do for them is important, and that they're going to take actions to protect themselves and protect others, that they shouldn't be able to do that. That doesn't fly with me.
Yeah. So I think what it comes back to is the concept of reckless endangerment. Mm-hmm. I think it's a valid concept. I think it would exist even in a libertarian legal order or system. Now, whether
So you're saying you would call the Gestapo to the church to shut it down?
That's what
yeah, I think you can use whether COVID-19 counts. I would leave it to folks who know more about.
But isn't that very, very important? Like, isn't that a very, very
It
important?
is. Like, it's very, very important. It's very, very important. And I want to take this shit over to the after hours.
Oh, damn.
Okay. Yeah. Because it's like
a little
it's like,
teaser there.
yeah, like we're running out of time here. So
Okay.
guys, if you hit us up over at patreon.com and you contribute a minimum of $1 per month, you cheapskates, you can help us out with more,
No, we
and it
love
helps
it.
us pay for like microphones and shit.
Yeah, we
So
decided to send a microphone to two of our colleagues over here because they don't have computers. So
yeah. So anyways, it really tremendously helps like cut the cost of productions and just keeps things running over here.
Yeah.
So also you should check out a podcast called Conversations About Freedom. It is run by Moral Bob, and it's pretty fucking awesome. So they're actually a sponsor of Punk Rock Libertarians. So yeah, you should check them out. I'm sure everybody's got a lot of time on their hands right now, as do we. We've actually got like a couple like really huge guests coming up. Tomorrow night, Dave Smith is going to be on the program.
Woo!
Yeah, so it's like, we're super excited about that. And then on Wednesday night,
Scott Horton.
Scott Horton is going to be on the program live.
Whoa!
Yeah, it's like this is our biggest week ever.
Yeah.
And then like I had great fun tonight. This is like Craig Shute and Mike Shipley's first time ever on the podcast, and I want to say I would like to have both of you guys back on again if you'll come back on again.
Sure, that'd be great.
Loved it. It was really fun, you guys.
Awesome. Cool. All right, so we're gonna head on over to the after hours. We also have t-shirts over at libertariancountry.com. Mike Shipley, show me your t-shirt, dude.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. So that t-shirt right there, you have to talk so people can see it. Yeah. Okay. So so that t-shirt right there. And if you type in the code PRL or the code PRL podcast, you will receive a 10% discount. Until next time, live free
Or die.